Well, Joe Biden unveiled his next great tax and spend infrastructure program. Uh, but I think today I'll hold off on talking about that because I really want to talk about this Matt Gaetz thing. And at first, when the New York Times story came out yesterday, it just seemed like typical, politician-y gossip, sex scandal stuff. Apparently Matt was palling around with a 17-year-old at some point in his life. I don't think it's exactly clear how old he was at the time, but he's in his 30s now. So, whatever. If this were true, you can imagine, wow, there must have been a decent age gap between him and this 17-year-old. But something interesting happened. Right after this story came out, Matt Gaetz came out, and not only did he deny the story, which you would expect, every politician denies this sort of thing. At first, we all remember Anthony Weiner denying that he posted his own nudes on Twitter and said, "Oh, I got hacked." It was pretty great. I loved the whole saga, especially that press conference that he did where Andrew Breitbart came up in the middle and just took over the press conference before it started and started doing his own press conference at Anthony Weiner's venue. I mean, it was great. And so at first, when I'm reading Gaetz's response, I kind of have Anthony Weiner in mind because Anthony Weiner, of course, also later got in trouble for having lewd relations, sending lewd texts to an underage girl. But I have to say, after hearing out what Matt Gaetz had to say, after reading his short Twitter thread, and hearing him out on Tucker, I have to say, if he's making stuff up, he's at least much more creative than Anthony Weiner was, and he's a much better liar. Because he spun a pretty complicated tale that I don't think anybody was expecting to hear. It's not the kind of excuse that I would have anticipated. Gaetz essentially came out and said, "Hey, there's an ex-FBI agent who's blackmailing me and saying that he can, that there's this investigation going on and that he will make that investigation go away if my family pays him $25 million, and that, Joe Biden will pardon me and what have you." And even named the guy, and I can't remember the guy's name at this time. You can look it up if you want. Although who knows, maybe YouTube will make him kind of like that, like certain other people, to where you can't name him on YouTube without getting your video banned. So I guess maybe it's a good thing I don't remember the guy's name. But I mean, he went out and named the guy who he says is blackmailing. I mean, he says, "Oh yeah, this is the guy. This guy is the New York Times' source. He was trying to blackmail me. The investigation is bogus, and they're using it to try and extort $25 million from me." And you know what? This is not something that I would all put past the FBI. Now, apparently this guy is an ex-FBI agent, but this FBI is kind of like the CIA. You're never really, you might retire, but you're never. You're always going to be a part of the FBI. You're always a part of that FBI family. Same thing with all these other intelligence cults. And we know that the U.S. intelligence community has used sexual blackmail for decades. There was, COINTELPRO, I believe, was the one where they, set up the brothels with cameras so that they could try and incriminate powerful Americans. Then, of course, there's Jeffrey Epstein, Roy Cohn, Donald Trump's, personal attorney for a long time. I believe he was had played a part in that because, of course, the overlap between the intelligence community and the mob is, it varies to a certain extent, but there's a lot of overlap there from time to time. So it is plausible that Matt Gaetz could be the victim of an FBI sexual blackmail op. But beyond that, we don't know much else yet. He's saying that there are tapes that apparently, he went to his local FBI, and the local FBI office was trying to catch the ex-FBI guy who is blackmailing Gaetz, and apparently there was a wire worn, and there's tapes of the conversation, and I guess they were supposed to complete the operation today, and wire the $25 million, and then once that guy had the $25 million, that would be the crime. Then they would have him implicated. It would be a sting he'd be stung at that point. It was a trap, and before that could happen, the New York Times put their story out, and so Gaetz is saying that, well, the New York Times did this to foil the operation. That's why their source used them to blow this whole thing up and to turn it around on Gaetz. And so this could be certainly the biggest scandal since Russiagate, which I guess isn't saying a whole lot. It hasn't been very long since Russiagate, but this is on that level. In that case, the Russiagators were trying to frame the President of the United States for being a traitor to Russia, and now it's not at all unreasonable that they might frame a congressman for having sexual relations with a 17-year-old. Now, the way that Gaetz answered these questions in his interview with Tucker was kind of interesting, because the way his language, that he said, like, I never was on flights with a 17-year-old. But then in another answer, he said, well, a 17-year-old doesn't exist. And so I'm not exactly sure to what extent he's denying the stuff about the 17-year-old. But again, depending on when this occurred, do I really care if Matt Gaetz had a relationship with a 17-year-old? I mean, not so much. I mean, unless he was like, I don't know what age you would cut it off at, but I mean, the difference between 17 and 18. I mean, Mancow in the Morning married an 18-year-old when he was in his 40s, and nobody batted an eyelash at that. And of course, there's plenty of other examples. I mean, you can probably find, gross old billionaires who marry 18-year-olds, and that's just totally fine because that's the legal age of consent. But so, Matt Gaetz going on dates with a 17-year-old. Do I really find that morally offensive compared to the things that politicians do? Absolutely not. Is it something that is a good idea? Is it something that is good optics? No. Is it something that I think would be kind of icky? Do I think, if I knew a guy who was, in his, I don't know, early 30s, late 20s, and they said, hey, and they told me, hey, I've got a date with this girl, she's 17, I would think, maybe wait a year, wait a few months, just to be safe. I don't think that would be the smartest idea. But hey, I wasn't exactly sure to what extent he denied it. He might be denying this totally and saying, hey, I never met any 17-year-old girls, totally made up. I mean, there's a lot more that we're going to learn here, but I think that this could be a very, very interesting story, and it could be a sort of a snapshot of how, the intelligence folks generally operate. And, in case anyone is wondering what the motivation could be, why would that doesn't make any sense. Why would the brave men and women of the FBI want to frame, this congressman from the Panhandle? What sense does that make? Well, for one, he is anti-war, and apparently he's pretty hostile to the intelligence community, let's put it that way, which you have to be if you're an anti-war person. And he's, friends, I believe, with Ro Khanna, who is, a anti-war left-winger. That sort of thing, true bipartisanship is always, a threat to the Uniparty, because they're unifying against the deep state, so that's not something that they would like. And, and two, he's effective at speaking. He's effective on TV. Unlike, say, Ron Paul, who, has his, very rabid fan base and is very likable to a certain degree, he was never going to achieve mass appeal across the country. Matt Gaetz, in the future, not now, obviously, he's just a congressman. In the future, maybe, I don't know, he runs for governor of Florida or a senator or something like that later on, and then, runs for president. and as a popular Republican, on an anti-war platform and an anti-intelligence community platform, that could be a problem. So I think there's plenty of reason for why the FBI might target someone like him in this sort of a way that he's describing. And so I think, while I have no way of believing, of choosing, okay, do I believe him or the New York Times, what he's saying is plausible. And two, considering the sources, New York Times is not a reliable source. So I don't trust the New York Times. Apparently, though, Matt Gaetz himself is not. What's not in dispute is that he's under investigation. So the investigation is real. But again, do I trust the FBI that their investigation is not political? No, because they're the FBI. They did similar things to MLK. And so if the FBI was going to try and implicate, our great national hero Martin Luther King Jr. in all sorts of sexually deviant acts, and I think in some cases crimes, well, you think that that would be that doing that to Matt Gaetz would be too extreme from their perspective? Absolutely not. And so I think we'll see in due time. Gaetz is, he's putting himself out on a limb here if he's telling a lie. Because he's going out and saying, hey, he's calling on the FBI, hey, release the tapes. Got to release the tapes. What is the FBI going to do? Come out and say tapes don't exist? I guess they could do that. Perhaps they could say we lost the tapes. That's another alternative, but then that still somewhat validates what Gaetz is saying. And then three is they actually release the tapes, and it validates Gaetz' story. So he seems pretty confident in it. But again, I don't know. I was never, I got a bad feeling from Gaetz early on when he first entered Congress. I was not a fan of him for a long time, but he's been pretty good on a lot of the war stuff and things, and he has stood out to me more and more. But that still does not mean that my original kind of weird feeling I got from him is totally gone. As far as by weird, I didn't necessarily trust him. I thought he was grifty at first. As time has gone on, I've seen his positions as more genuine because of the way he talks about them. So I would say as of now, my default is to believe him over certainly over the establishment. But that's not a 100% certainty. I think the default position is Gaetz is telling the truth, and I will wait to see if the FBI or the New York Times wants to produce evidence to validate their claims. But at risk of sounding too wishy-washy on this issue, my gut instinct is that I do not expect the New York Times or the FBI to present real incriminating evidence about Gaetz. And so I do, but I don't also think that things will go 100% his way. I don't think that the FBI will just put out whatever these audio recordings are that he feels exonerate him. I think that if Gaetz is telling the truth, the Bureau is going to go into cover-up mode. That's probably what will happen. As I've said many, many times on this channel, the FBI is the cover-up crew. You don't really want the FBI to investigate anything of significance, because when the FBI comes in and they take over an investigation from whatever the local authorities are, the FBI is there to essentially advance the political agenda of the regime. So I don't think that the FBI will be eager to indict their own people and exonerate somebody like Matt Gaetz, who is generally seen as an enemy of their class. So I guess I'll continue following this, and I will try and update my thoughts in the future once we know more about this whole situation.